Hi, and welcome to Chapter 30, Learning Objective 1, where we're going to talk about the difference between inflation, deflation, and hyperinflation in the first objective. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. There we are. Okay, so our first learning objective is to define the terms inflation, deflation, and hyperinflation. Okay, so an inflation is an overall increase in the price level. So basically, what happens is the value of a dollar is decreasing, meaning it doesn't buy as much. And because that's decreasing, prices then are increasing. Okay, in deflation, we have the value of a dollar increasing. And so that means that theoretically, prices and how much your dollar buys, your dollar would buy more. In inflation, your dollar buys less. Deflation, your dollar buys more. Hyperinflation is very high rates of inflation. So this is where it's really out of control. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk in this, we're going to introduce you to the classical theory of money. And this basically explains how inflation, the money supply, the value of money, and the interest rate all kind of come together. And we're going to use this in an equation form, then we'll also use it in a graphic. Okay, so the quantity theory of money looks at the long run determinants of the price level. And that's kind of important because as you move on in economic theory, we talk about short run and then we talk about long run. In fact, if you major in economics, then you'll take courses that pertain particularly to the short run and then others that explain the long run. Okay, from 2008 to 2018, prices are going up about 1.5% a year. One of the things you want to think about is how does that impact individuals? Well, remember, we have a couple of different types of individuals. We have those that are salaried workers, contract workers that might have cost of living adjustments or are indexed to inflation. Remember, Social Security is one of those things, indexed to inflation. So when the inflation rate goes up 1.5%, that means that Social Security goes up 1.5%. If we look at it in a longer time span or in a particular time span, in the 1970s, from 1970 to 1979, prices rose about 7.8% per year. So you can see that that's vastly different than what we've had in the recent decades. Now, who's hurt by these increase in the average prices? People who aren't indexed to inflation. So hourly workers are one that we tend to see are hurt by inflationary periods. So, if you get a raise of 3% because you're doing such a good job, but inflation's running 1.5%, then essentially your wages have only increased 1.5%. Okay. So here's some international inflation rates. Okay. Notice 32% in Argentina. That's hyperinflation. Turkey, same. Nigeria is up there. And then we have some lower inflation rates. And this is of 2018. If you're interested in a particular country, you can click on my hyperlink, take you over to a trading economics, and that'll go ahead and click on some. Now, extreme hyperinflation we see in Zimbabwe in 2008. What's interesting is that in 2018, Zimbabwe suffered very similar hyperinflation as well. And this is where we had the money supply out of control. Okay, so inflation affects everyone, some more so than others, as I discussed in the last slide. And again, it talks about the idea of the function of money being a medium of exchange, because when we have inflation, it takes you more physical dollars to buy the same amount of products and services. So people want more physical dollars. They demand more dollars to carry out the same amount of purchasing. So essentially, inflation is a rise in the price level. Each dollar buys a smaller quantity of goods or smaller real goods and services. So people will, the demand for money, the demand for dollars would increase. Okay, so just a little fun 1.5 minute clip follows this. And hey, if you've been frozen for years and you didn't realize what inflation was, maybe you would look this silly as well. I'll see you in a few minutes.
Gentlemen, it's come to my attention that a breakaway Russian republic, Krepelakistan, is about to transfer a nuclear warhead to the United Nations in a few days. Here's the plan. We get the warhead and we hold the world ransom for $1 million.
Well, don't you think we should maybe ask for more than $1 million? $1 million isn't exactly a lot of money these days. Virtucon alone makes over $9 billion a year.
Really? Mm-hmm. It's a lot. Okay, then. We hold the world ransom for $100 billion.
Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that. I always like to throw something in here, which is a little interesting. So let's go back to what we were discussing. Okay, so let's take a look at the classical theory of inflation and look at it in terms of what happens. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, let's see if I can get the pen working, is I'm going to go ahead and draw a graph. Okay, now money demand. So how much money do we need to hold in its most liquid form in terms of dollars? And again, there are some some fluctuating circumstances. You'll see it here. Now, what I'm going to do when I draw this classical theory money graph is I'm going to put inflation, I'm going to put the interest rate over here on the y-axis. Okay, and this will be the quantity of money. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is money demand, right? And we talked about this briefly in other learning objectives, but I'm going to put the demand for money here. So this is the demand for dollars, and this is individuals that need to hold wealth in liquid form, right? So the spending that we have. Now, one thing I really want you to take away at this point is notice that as the interest rate increases, the demand for money decreases. So let me just, I'm going to do this in yellow because I'm going to erase it right away. But so let's say we have an interest rate of 6% here. Then the quantity of loanable funds or demand for money would be, let's say, 1,000. As the interest rate increases, let's see if I can find something a little better. There we go. To say 8%, then the demand for money decreases to 800. Now let's think about why that would be true. Because people don't want to hold money in its liquid form because the opportunity cost of holding money increases as the interest rate increases. Because you could put it in a savings account and you could be earning that interest. So one of the things that we know is the demand for money is downward sloping. Why? 2 reasons. One, as the interest rate increases, the opportunity cost of holding money in its most liquid form increases. Also think about it this way. As the interest rate increases, people don't want to borrow as much. They want to save more. So as the interest rate increases, you want to save. So you don't want money in its most liquid form. You want to use that as an investment. Okay, so if I ask you on a test, why is the demand curve, the demand for money slope downward? You can say because the higher the interest rate, the opportunity cost increases of holding money in its liquid form. As the interest rate decreases, that opportunity cost goes down. And so therefore people will hold more money in its most liquid form. Again, I'll just put a 3% here and you can see that people will want to hold more money in its most liquid form. So people want to spend. And so you want to hold money in its liquid form. I think that makes sense. Hope so. Okay, the money supply. Well, this is the M1, M2, we just call it M2, or money supply in our course, because you can take an entire course of the money supply if you wanted to. Again, I'm going to put the interest rate here. And I'm going to go ahead and put the demand for money right here. Demand for dollars here. Again, why is it downward sloping up with the quantity here? And we just talked about that in the previous slide. Now, where the demand for money and the supply of money intersect is where the interest rate will be. But what happens here is the supply, the money supply, M1, M2 is vertical. So I'll just put money supply. Now, why is it vertical? It's vertical because only the Fed can print money, right, legally. So what happens is this is like a monopoly, okay? And because it's like a monopoly, it is perfectly inelastic. You don't need to know all this part. This is just for people who've had micro. And so it's perfectly inelastic because there are no substitutes to money in its current form, unless you want to talk about cryptocurrency. And that graph looks a little bit different. So we're going to go ahead and put where these two intersect. Where the money supply and the demand for money intersect will be the interest rate in the long term. Okay, so again, in the long run, they're brought into equilibrium by the overall level of prices. That's what that means. Okay, so much better, nicer graph. Now, what I want to show you in this particular graph is a little bit different. Notice that the lines that are drawn in the graph itself are exactly the same. But I want to explain where this comes from. I want you also to know, according to the classical dichotomy, that there is an inverse relationship between the value of money and the price level. So notice that if I take this side right here, this is low and this is high. And that makes sense, right? So what I want you to think about is, let's say we have $1. And that dollar buys $1's worth of goods. So I'm right here. Then if I follow this over, $1 buys $1. So that means the price level is 1. Okay? Now, let's say that $1 only buys 75 cents. 75 cents. So the value of $1 has decreased. If 75 cents is 3/4 of $1, that's where that came from. And if we want to figure out what the price level, we take that 3/4 and we take its reciprocal, 4/3, which gives us 1.33 repeating. That's where this number comes from right here. Again, if $1 only buys 50 cents or half of its value, then that must mean that prices have went up 2 times, because we take the reciprocal of 1/2, that gives us 2/1, which equals 2. So that means the price level has doubled. Again, looking at it this way, if $1 only buys 25 cents or 1/4 of $1, follow that over. 1/4 reciprocal is 4. So prices levels have quadrupled. So what do I want you to take away from here? I want you to know that there's an inverse relationship, meaning when one goes up, the other one goes down. So there's an inverse relationship between the price level Now, what is the price level? The CPI, right? That we studied that in chapter 24. So this P is the price level. Notice it goes from high on the bottom to low. So it's exactly the opposite. That's why I'm saying there's an inverse relationship between prices and the value of a dollar, which is equal to 1 over the price level. Okay, so this one's an important graph, and I really want to make sure, take some time, rewind this if you need to, make sure you understand how we look and interpret this particular graph. That's the end of this learning objective. And if you're interested and want to see some problems with that graph or anything like that, just let me know. We're going to work with it more in the upcoming objectives to this chapter. Thanks, and have a great day.